All right, welcome back to The Ride. I'm Coach Q, and I'm happy to have you back for another episode. Today, I had the absolute pleasure of sitting with a legendary coach in our sport, Neil Duffy. After playing and graduating from the United States Naval Academy, Coach Duffy went on to lead an outstanding coaching and teaching career where he has influenced the lives of hundreds of individuals in the sport of lacrosse. He is a recipient of the U.S. Lacrosse Exemplary Coaching Award, an author of books, a student of the game, and a great teacher of young men and women. Our conversation revolved heavily around Coach Duffy's unique philosophies around player development, including the use of pendulum theory to grow players beyond their limits, reimagining wall ball, and more. As always, hopefully you find some value in it and enjoy the ride. All right, Coach Duffy, welcome into The Ride. It's an extreme honor for me to have you here sitting with you today and to learn about your large experience here in the coaching world, in the lacrosse world. I'm really excited to have you on the show here. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing well, Zach, and thank you so much for having me. I think I've seen all of your other guests and podcasts and really enjoyed all of them, so it's an honor to be among that group. And anytime we get to talk lacrosse, it's a good day, so I appreciate you having me on and happy to get right at it. Let's go.
I love it. Coach, did you have a favorite episode in there when you were looking at the catalog here on The Ride?
Oh, man. Well, yeah, you always get in trouble when you have to pick on those things. But did you have Coach Stagnita on a couple of weeks back?
Yeah.
Was that you? All right, I'm going to pick him only because, well, not only, but among the reasons was that he and I are from the same basic generation. We played against each other back in college, so let's just use that one. And really enjoyed his remarks, by the way, telling the story about his coaching experience and all that. So yeah, Coach Stagnita, but the other ones were fantastic too. And I love the range that you've applied to this, where you had you had a box guest, you had a conditioning piece there, you had several assistant coaches, which is great. You've had head coaches. It's been a really nice spread and seeing the game from different angles, so really enjoyed all of them. But I'll pick Coach Stagnita just because we're the same year group from college. How about that?
All right, I appreciate those words on the podcast, Coach, and I put you on the spot early in the episode. But, a conversation we were having in person, which kind of led to this interview, was a lot around wall ball and the ways you're kind of attacking what is one of the most iconic things in our sport. Everybody knows the wall. Everybody's hit the wall at some point if you've been in lacrosse, and you've got a really awesome understanding of teaching and developing skills so that they can translate to the field. But wall ball is just something that I think people need to continuously evolve their understanding on and kind of attacking it in different ways. And that was the discussion that we had, and I really enjoyed it. So I'm going to start off with one of your sound bites here, and then I want to get your thoughts as we kind of dive in. It said, just because we do a drill doesn't mean we're improving. I think there's not a better spot in our sport than the wall when it comes to that, because a lot of people do it, and I would love to hear your thoughts on just different ways you're looking at it now and developing skills there.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Coach. That's a great place to start, and I would also say getting started with all these questions this morning is, any one of these questions could go on for a really long time. So I've tried to learn to tighten down my instruction and responses as tight as I can make them. But the wall ball one is really kind of near and dear to my heart as a player and as a coach, certainly, and based on a lot of interactions with other coaches and some really fantastic players all these years. I would also say Tom Duquette, who was my colleague and good friend at Norfolk Academy for a really long time, he and I addressed this with our players there. And wall ball is certainly near and dear to my personal heart. I kind of started a little bit late in the game, I would say, probably in 10th grade up in New York, which was a little bit behind some of my teammates, so I had a little catching up to do. And so I spent a pretty good amount of time on the wall right at a school right by my house. And, of course, that carried through all my playing career and then into coaching. And I'll say very quickly, Coach, also that, my thoughts here are the way that I've been trying to do things all these years. But for your listeners, and depending on what age level they may be coaching, they might have a different opinion, which I totally am good with. So, just from my own perspective, my thoughts are based on I guess we're on 37 years now coaching, mostly high school, mostly varsity, but also plenty of youth league, rec league, camp, travel teams, JV, middle school. And I had a bonus year in college last spring at Hampton-Sydney College, which was just fantastic. So got a pretty good coverage of a lot of different levels. And so, everybody's got their own take on this. So, but my thought on the wall program is, and I think I'm going to quote a USA Lacrosse article that they put up, a very short one in Lacrosse magazine about a year or two ago from the convention. And I'm pretty sure it was Roy Colsey, who is now a head PLL coach and a Hall of Fame and Syracuse University, USA, the whole thing. And the article, forgive me for paraphrasing, but it was something along the lines of coaches do wall ball wrong or don't use it effectively or something in that realm.
Sure.
And one of the things that they wrote about, and I haven't seen the lesson that he provided, but the article indicated that his thought on that is that you should be more concerned about throwing the ball hard at the wall, which is something I've always been thinking, and not worry so much about the catching part. And I can dig in on that in just a second, but my thought is along those lines. And in there's a book I read called Ecological Coaching. I've heard Jamie Monroe and some others talk about that. And one of the things that they talk about in there is that catching a ball should probably be on the back end of the skill development, meaning teach how to throw the ball properly first. And my instruction on the wall all these years, as I showed you over there, I try to put much more body into the wall work than some people might. I back the kids off the wall a little bit more, and I have them throw the ball really, really hard and a little bit higher than most instructors, where they have a chance to catch the ball, enough reaction time to receive the ball back, as opposed to putting them up close and having them throw it hard, and they're almost certainly going to miss the ball.
Yeah.
And as I showed you live, a lot of times I'll even move the kids way back off the wall and have them, just really throw it far. And it's hard to do on a podcast to show you the different things that I look at there. But I would say in summary that I have the kids back off the wall more than some people do. I don't like when the kids just kind of go up there and tap it off the wall, which is, again, if that's what coaches think best fits their instruction, I'm totally good with that. My vote is move them back, have them throw the ball hard, have them catch it when they can, make an attempt to catch it, certainly. But I also, as I showed you, also have 5 or 6 balls in my feet all the time when I'm on the wall with these players. And if you miss a ball, just grab one and keep it rolling. So I think that's like a happy medium of trying to catch the ball and the importance of that. The other thing I'll say quickly, and then we can dig in as you need to, is I tend to move my players' feet and hands around a lot. And again, instead of just, because you can throw the ball, we call it bad feet, you can kind of just pop the ball up there regardless of how strong your base might be. But as we move players back off the wall, you need to have a good balance, and I call it CG, center of gravity, and a good, strong base of operations to throw those balls properly. And when we intentionally move your feet around a little bit and move your hands, sometimes I'll have them choke way down, you have to rely on getting in sync with your body. So it's a combination of strength, distance from the wall, changing techniques, and so that's the way I do it. I talk a lot about strong base. So we can dive in on any of that.
Sure. I think I mentioned this at the start of the episode, but one of the quotes that stood out to me, and I wanted to relate it to this wall ball concept, you talk about, just because we do a drill doesn't mean we're improving. And I think that is the kind of disconnect that I see sometimes with the wall of just saying, hey, I'm going to do the same thing all the time. And that's where you really caught my attention when you were going through this with the youth group that we were working with, of just the creativity where you're kind of going goofy footed, where if you're right-handed, let's move our right foot out in front of us. And now we're kind of activating more of our upper body than our lower body. You had, again, like you just mentioned, kind of bringing the hands all the way down the stick and then throwing. So I don't know. I just appreciated the creativity with which you were going about this, of trying to do something different that I think is oftentimes viewed as kind of this consistent, well, you have to do it kind of this way. And it has been for generations.
Yeah, thank you. And again, I'm happy to talk to any of your coaches. I should have said this before. I'm technically retired now, which I'm kind of enjoying, but I'm also having an opportunity to coach different coaches and players and programs. So if any of your listeners need me to come demo what we're talking about at their school or with them, I'm happy to do that. But yeah, that's still only about 5% of what we could really hit on that topic. But just because we're doing something does not necessarily mean we're getting better. And some instruction is I have always found to be helpful on the wall, because again, a lot of kids just go to the wall and they, 25 right, 25 left, and it's helpful, but I think with some better instruction, the players get a lot more out of it. And
Yeah.
again, we do things we call it around the clock, where we dip our stick and twisters and offhand and all that. So there's a lot more to talk about, but
How should a coach structure his wall ball routine, right? Because you just mentioned a couple different techniques there. The around the clock, I love that concept of kind of teaching the kids in a visual way. Hey, let's throw it from 3 or let's throw it from 11. What are ways you would go out and structure a wall ball routine for coaches that are developing players at maybe the youth to high school level?
Right, good question. Well, it depends certainly on the number of players that you have out there, a number of coaches, and what else is going on with your practice session. So this could be a separate evolution, just a wall session if you want to do it that way. But you can also incorporate it into kind of a station sort of format. If you've got 2 or 3 coaches, you can have one coach supervising the wall, and you can have somebody else doing shooting or dodging or whatever else might be appropriate. So it depends on the number of players and coaches and how much room you have. But certainly I like to get it down to as few players as I can, which usually is 3 to 4 to 5 is ideal, probably 6 to 8 is doable. But if they're on their offhand, or they're 3 o'clock, or they're throwing balls, we call them bad passes to the off side, or we're doing twisters on purpose, they're going to miss balls. And if you have 8 or 10 players over there, it gets a little messy. But 3 or 4 or 5 players, and I try to structure it where we're all kind of doing the same thing at the same time. Because again, if you have kids doing backhand passes and other kids doing regular passes, it can overlap, their spaces and all that. If you go to the wall on your own, it depends on how much time you have. And so usually I tell the players, 5, 6, 8 minutes, and then change up the skill. Like we said, change your feet or change your hands after 6 or 8 minutes. And again, I don't do it by numbers usually. I don't have them do 50. I'll just say, just do a set of, right hand, 12 o'clock, bad feet, or something like that. And by the time they get in that rhythm, 6, 8 minutes, get a tiny bit of fatigue, we'll change it up. Maybe left hand, maybe change their hands, change their feet.
Yeah, to find the bad pass and bad feet, what's the philosophy behind doing those two things? I really think that's a creative way to go about it.
Well, back in the old days when we used to play, our coaches used to call it the box. And again, it's kind of hard on my screen here, but you always want to throw a ball to your teammates, to a stick on his my right side ear, let's say. But they would tell us if the ball was on that backside ear or backside shoulder, we should be able to catch that and do something pretty quickly with it. And so we call them bad passes. And when I say we, I should credit Tom Duquette, my longtime colleague and friend at Norfolk Academy, who we spent hours and hours and hours talking about this with our players. We would have the kids practice, tell them, like, you're not always going to get a pass right here. So let's get the stick over here, and then let's get ready to play. As you may have seen when we were working with those young players, I'm talking over the players a lot. That's a separate little coaching piece we can get to later. Mm-hmm. But I talk over the players all the time and try to remind them of what we're looking for and change things up. And so now after that 6, 8 minutes of bad passes, now we're just going to keep on rolling into something else. But I think that one in particular is helpful. The bad pass is not really bad, back hip. That's not an easy handle. But something up in what we used to call the box area around your face, players should be able to handle those and continue to play. And I also have said thousands of times, I guess, when we change up our hands and feet on purpose, we don't really want players to exercise their skills like that in games. We always want them to have a good, strong base. But when we change up the feet, as you saw, it requires, and again, I'm happy to come visit schools if we need to, but it gets you in better sync with your base and your strength of how to throw a good pass. And usually after those 6, 8 minutes, I usually encourage my players to go back and do what I call a reset, which is good hands, good feet, about 10, 12 yards off the wall, and just boom, 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 really quick, 10 strong, I call them reset reps. And usually after you've gone for about 8 minutes, let's say, with the backwards feet or the flat feet or the funky hands, all those things that we do, I would say almost every player can feel just in a short time that their base one will feel smoother and better. And when you build on top of that over weeks and months and years, you start to smooth out some strength into your game. So again, we do it on purpose to challenge the player on the full range of their skills. And I'll say quickly, also related to that, we always have a part where I call it PLL, which is, do something PLL. That means behind the back, between the legs, over the shoulder. And I call it something the world has never seen before. So we want the players to be creative. We want them to have fun. And again, depending on how much time they're planning to dedicate out there for that session, 30, 40, 50, 60 minutes. Usually I save that for the last, 5 to 8 minutes. You don't want it to be the whole time probably, but I have them reset every 6, 8 minutes, just a quick reset. This is our base. This is what we want. But now let's test our limits. Let's hold our stick lower. And as you saw, that's harder. But if you can manage your stick down at the bottom and you go back to your normal grip, you're going to feel a little bit better. If you change into goofy feet to get in better sync with your body, and then you go back to your base, usually the players can feel that. And then again, we develop that, over time. So again, there's a lot more still, but hopefully that helps for that question.
No, that's a great explanation. And, I try to find the best analogy to my guys to explain this concept of like, hey, you're not going to be holding your hands together at the bottom of your stick and throwing in a game, but learning this concept actually, it's an art, right? If you practice this form of it, you're going to get overall a better kind of understanding of your body and your stick and all that. I do think we glossed over a little bit of this power concept where, a lot about more just throwing it against the wall than kind of teaching the throw and the catch. And what's the philosophy behind like making them throw it very hard and understanding the technique, and what does that technique even look like when they have to throw it hard, and you emphasizing this piece?
Yeah, another great question. I'll call it the general curriculum, of the things that we're talking about is oriented toward the field play. And I know some of your guests, you had a box expert or two in there, and the box aspect of the game is certainly super duper critical. And I would say there are definitely some differences in the way that the game is played in the box compared to the field, and that requires at least a slightly, if not more than slightly different skill set. And totally agree with that. Most of the time, the stuff that we're doing on the wall is what I would call default field, two-handed. That's a whole separate question that we could be here on all night. Is typical field players all these years have been sort of two-handed. Most box players are very one-handed. So now do you spend all of your time on the wall one hand? That's different than 50-50, right and left. And that's a different, it's a different argument, I think. And so there's a wide range of skills. That's why we do behind the back. That's why we do around the clock. We do, I call them hockey, scrape the ice. That 6 o'clock down low, you need to be able to master that. And so a really good field player would be adept at, right and left. And again, happy to support people who disagree with that. But right and left, all the way around the clock, good feet, goofy feet, good hands, bad hands. And what I've gotten out of that is it just gets your body in a much better sync with your stick, and you get to a better, stronger base. And again, we never really want to do that in a game, but we get a better base out of that because what I like to tell people, teach to the worst case, which is overtime in a state championship game. What are your players' mechanics and habits going to look like in overtime in a championship game? All the rest of it, no offense, doesn't really matter that much. If you're up 10 or down 10 or whatever. But when you're in an overtime game, your mechanics need to be really good. And what I have found is that if you grind in that strong, strong, strong base through, all that whole range of motion, you're not going to do a behind the back flip shot in a championship game, but your body will be in sync with what you need to do at that point. And I'll say two quick things. I'll say pendulum, and we'll come back to that. Remind me if I forget.
Okay.
And then golf bag. I said to Coach a couple of weeks ago, maybe think about a golf bag for a minute. In order to be a really good golfer, you need to be able to play every club in your bag, and that covers the whole spectrum of 300-yard drives and those killer 9-foot putts and everything in between. And so you could probably talk to golf people who could give you a much better answer than I can, but how do you teach young golfers? Do you go to the range and hit your driver for an hour one day? Do you go and hit your 6-iron for, a whole day? Or do you just mix and match and all that? So the coach I was talking to about this, who's a pretty accomplished coach, kind of gave me yeah, that's a good way to think about that. So you have to be able to putt, which is those quick boom. Those box skills are really good and tight. But you also need to be able to make a good cross-field 30-yard pass to start a play. And that requires at least a little different mechanical difference of how to throw and catch a ball, I think. Same with picking a ball up in traffic versus picking it up on the run. Again, there's a lot of different things you could hit there, but maybe your listeners could think about the golf bag analogy of there's a lot of things that you have to get proficient on before you can play at a high level of golf. And the pendulum one, I'll just add quickly, just from a general coaching perspective, I call it a pendulum, which is that you want to, or at least this is my opinion. Again, if your coaches disagree, I'm happy to talk to them about it and respect that. But whatever the skill is, I usually like to push the skill to one side of the analysis and work it there, and then push it to the other side and work it there, and then kind of rock back and forth until you get to the point that we want our players. And there are an infinite number of things that you can put into that category. Let's say defensive position, defensive checks, defensive one-on-one, defensive team play. So let me give you an example. If you want to do 6v6, let's say for 15, 20 minutes, and you want your defenders, if you don't give your defenders, again, those constraints or those parameters or the things that you're looking for, if you just tell the guys, hey, go play 6v6, and no instruction, they'll play, and again, just because we're doing something doesn't mean we're getting better, right? So if you have them playing 6v6 with no instruction and no guidance, they're just going to play. And okay, well, if you want to see what their defensive skills look like on the edge of one part of that pendulum, that is push them way out to the sideline or outside the box. Very aggressive, very active. And challenge them to get a sense of what that feels like out there. And then work on that a little bit, and then pack them in at 12 or 14 for X number of minutes and have them play that. And then where do you want that in a game, right? You as the coach would want to know how you're going to want to play that in a game. Maybe you want your team playing about 16, right? Which is a couple steps inside the box. So the pendulum, and again, we can get into the more on the pendulum part of this from the coaching side, but it applies to the wall. And that is,
It does. You can see that.
stretch your players' limits, get them 50, 40 yards off the wall. And people, when I've done this with people, some of them would kind of like look at me like, why are you doing that? And like, pendulum, get them way out. And now your whole body has to get in sync. What I've said a number of times is that if you can throw a football, and football is a real good example here. We just did golf a minute ago. If you can throw a football pretty well 15 yards, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can throw a good 40, 45-yard pass. But if you can throw a good 40, 45-yard pass, again, better, stronger base, harder to do that, you're more likely to be able to throw a good 15-yard pass, which requires that little touch, again, if you want to use the box comparison.
Yeah.
So do you want your quarterbacks doing all 15-yard passes? Okay, yep. Those little swing passes or those, 10-yard downfield plays? Or do you want them to be able to throw a 40-yard, stretch the field a little bit, and then that changes the other things that you do? So I call it pendulum on everything. Skills, tactics, pendulum.
And that's just letting your players see a variety of environments, I think is what I'm picking up from that. And when other coaches were kind of like, hey, what's Coach Duffy doing here, moving a kid back 40 yards? I almost got more interested because I saw that in real time of this is a really creative way to put a player in an environment that he's going to need to have new thoughts about what he's taking in, right? He's got to think of a new output for this new input that he's receiving. I love the concept of the golf piece too. People that listen to this show know I love multi-sport analogies, and I'm fascinated with different techniques of different players. Quarterbacks are a great one. Aaron Rodgers fascinates me, man, how he releases that ball with just a different type of technique, and it really makes it sail, at least in his prime. Romo's another one that, unfortunately, that's been my quarterback growing up. I wish he won more, but he had this type of mechanic that had a lot of touch, which is what you're trying to develop through all this stuff. So I know that was kind of a rant, but I love the pendulum idea. I think that's a great visualization for trying everything. It's really, really well done.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll just throw this in too, Zach, if you let me, on the pendulum, going back to the defense part for a second. And there are, again, this applies to literally, I think, everything, every skill, every tactic. You can apply a pendulum type of scenario to this thing. But one, again, just a quick follow-up is, and constraints, right? Like, put constraints on what you're looking for to get the outcome that you want to see after 10 or 15 minutes or by the end of the week. Sometimes it takes 2 or 3 days to push through some of this. But if you're doing 1v1s, I was thinking about this the other day, and you've got, most teams that do 1v1s put 4 lines in the corners, and, your attack guys will dodge 1v1 to the cage, blah, 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 all good. And if you do, let's say you're going to get 15 reps out of that for one of each defender. And that's actually probably a lot, but let's say it's 15 for a second. So the question that I always ask myself is, of those 15 reps that I'm probably going to get on this set, how many do I want to be sort of normal? Again, center of this is what it looks like. This is our base defense. We're playing the guys at 14. How many do we want of that to be that situation? And you decide the number, 8, 9, 10, whatever it is. How many of them, and again, a constraint for your listeners to think about is, how about this one? How about no checks, right? So that piece, now we're emphasizing footwork, hands, angles, things like that. And again, I don't think you want 15 of those because it's not particularly applicable, but again, you're challenging your player to kind of see it a little bit differently. How about?
I like the opposite of that too, Coach. I like getting the guys who don't throw checks. You got to throw a check before the rep's over.
Oh yeah, yeah. So right. So now you got 15 reps, let's say, and again, it could be whatever. And part of that, and let's say 8 or 10 of them are just play. And most of your players, and not you, but the people that we coach, right, are going to throw a lot of checks in that sequence. There's a pretty good guess. You do 2 or 3 sets where you tell them no checks and see how they react to that. And now they're getting a little better feel for their feet and their hands and their ankles. Okay. And then there's the one check. So now sometimes you restrict it to one check. That means you're letting them play a little bit. And yeah, we're going to get that check if we see it. But now we have to kind of set it up and be in a pretty good position instead of just chopping on people. And then lastly, how do you get all this into one set? How about you're down 3 goals with a minute to go, shot clock era, and the other team can run the ball out, right? So now you need your guys chasing to the sideline, getting over the head, wrapping kayaks, pencils, whatever you got to do. Do you want all 15 of them to be that as a general thing? And I would say probably not. And so again, as a coach, there's your pendulum, right? We've got sideline down by 3. How about the no checks might be 25? I don't know what the scenario is. 25 seconds to go. You're up 2 or 3. We don't want to foul. We don't want to give up an easy goal. One check. I've always enjoyed that one where you kind of like, okay, guys, we'll let you have one check, but make it count, and that's it. And now you have to fight back. And so again, those are the constraints or the pendulum part. But you also want the players to get 8 or 10, what we'll call
Normal.
regular
Yeah.
ones where they've got to find out what they can do. So that's really hard because you only have 15's a lot. And it might come over 2 days, by the way, or 3. And like one day it's heavy on that part of the pendulum, tomorrow it's the other side, and then you keep working into that.
Yeah. Just an add on to this, I've loved moving from kind of the static one-on-one start to more of a approach around the cone because it kind of creates that randomness sometimes. Even just saying, hey, offensive guy run around that cone, defensive guy run around that cone, maybe even add 2 cones on both so they choose either one. And now you've created an element of randomness within a static environment, but at least they're getting a different look within that. But I love this idea, Coach. The pendulum is something I'm absolutely going to take. When it comes to just wrapping up the conversation on throwing and catching, you mentioned, hey, focusing in on the throwing, but are there any sound bites or any, technical aspects we want to touch on when it comes to catching the ball and how you kind of teach guys to catch or things that you see kind of that are off in guys who maybe are doing it incorrectly from a fundamental standpoint sometimes?
Yeah, great question again. I think the short answer is you've heard this a million times, and I'm probably one of the ones who've said it. Catch like you're catching an egg. You see a lot of young players, and again, it's hard on my screen here, but they kind of snap at the ball, and when you reach out front, you're susceptible to being checked or chopped out front there. So good players, I think, will try to catch the ball a little bit on their back shoulder where they're protected with their head and their shoulders and try to catch the ball a little bit deeper into their stance. So again, I see a lot of young players reaching for the ball. And I think a lot of that you just work through, but you can work that on the wall. And sometimes I've said that if you can picture back in the old days, we would run film literally forward and backwards with a little switch. I know your listeners probably don't know what that means, right? And so a throw should be, and it's hard on the screen, but throw that way, and then if you were to reverse that, that would be kind of what your catch looks like, and you catch it sort of giving back and catching it kind of deeper than some young players do. And depending on how much time you have, and again, if you've got 3 kids on the wall compared to 10, you might be able to make some improvements on that. It's totally worth it, but it's also, it's just a rep thing. So you emphasize catch the egg, catch it deep, and that the catch is the film reversal of throwing.
Okay. Coach, I've been trying to ask this more in my podcast session. It's kind of a question that I ask everybody. But from both an offensive and a defensive perspective, I'm interested in a skill trait that you think is maybe overvalued and practiced too much, both from offense and defense again, and then a undervalued trait that isn't really honed on in practice or maybe in individual sessions a lot from a defensive perspective. What do you think is the most overvalued and undervalued from both that offense and defensive side?
It's a good question. That's a tough one. I'll start with, and they may be related. We'll flip the coin on this. I think the undervalued one, the coaches that I've been working with all these years have heard me say this a million times, so it won't be surprise to them. I call it strong on the edge. And I think a lot of people undervalue the strength and that strong base that we talked about before, right? About the wall, just having, and I didn't really make this as clear as I should have, having good hips and that CG and that base and just that rock solid sort of, hate to say linebacker, basketball defense posture. Even when you're throwing, you have to have that base. And the thing that I think is undertaught by a lot of coaches and players is that strong on the edge, because when players, and again, it's hard to, I'd welcome an opportunity to talk to anybody who'd like to follow up, because I have done this with coaches. When you get to that point on your dodge, and let's just say, I don't even know, let's pick one near the goal. And an attackman's dodging to the goal, and you get to that, I call it a flash point, that edge, that flash point of the defender's in pretty good position, but he's very reliant on his stick right now to hold you back.
Kind of in a
And
half-step trail.
Yep. And exactly. And a lot of offensive players at this point will sort of scrape off because their coaches are like, hey, don't get tangled up, don't lose the ball in there. But I've tried to teach my players to kind of what I call drive through that edge to get in a better position. And part of the teaching of that, I always chuckle when I do this, is this notion of what we call arm tackle. Okay, so again, football for a minute. If you want to teach your players to tackle somebody on the other team, you don't really want these reach, and again, I always exaggerate on the pendulum here. The pendulum is like, oh, I'm going to reach out and swat this guy and hope that he goes down, to putting my chest on his chest and tackling him. So the lacrosse version of that is, I think a lot of players are not taught particularly well how to drive through those stick checks, arm tackles. And once you, and again, I'm happy to show you on a field or your listeners, but I think a lot of players turn those dodges out and don't take advantage of the fact that they have a little bit more of an advantage than they think they do sometimes. And they don't do it. And I think one of the reasons that they don't do it is because they haven't been taught well enough sometimes, and it's a confidence thing. It's a strength thing. It's a base thing. Again, that body awareness on the wall, which goes into everything. Okay, so I hope that's an okay answer. I think that is very under.
I think the concept that I've been kind of mulling with and teaching my guys about this concept is like finishing around the crease, right, in a dangerous area, and leverage. And this multi-sport conversation, I can already tell I'm a big fan of the way that you coach, obviously, but I'm just becoming more, because how many multi-sport analogies have we made in the first 20 minutes? But wrestling is one where my wrestlers come in and kind of inherently understand this leverage concept a lot because they practice it a lot. And so, no, I really like that, being able to push through and understand when you have leverage over an opponent. I love that.
And I think, Coach, and again, it's a coaching thing, which is why I'm so happy to talk about this, because it's a coaching thing. A lot of coaches sometimes will tell their players, hey, get to the front, or hey, you should have shot that, or hey, but I think you have to break it down and teach it, and so that the players actually feel what it's like. And again, it's hard on the screen here, but to feel what it's like to have somebody on your hip, and where they have it's a leverage, it's totally wrestling, and they may have the advantage or the leverage, and that's when you got to kind of maybe, all right, maybe I need to scrape this out and not challenge that. But if you can feel yourself getting through there, and again, there's a skill part of this where we have to teach the guys how to cradle the ball properly through that. But once you feel that leverage, that edge, to have the sense and the strength and the skill to exploit that, that's a teaching part. That
Yeah.
again, that I think that's the answer. So the overtaught part of that, I guess, again, flip the coin, is a lot of times you'll see players kind of like fake, we call it fake dodge sometimes, like do like a fake dodge to draw a slide, to, start the party, whatever, whatever they want to call that. And that's totally fine. But from the defensive perspective, if they're not scraping through that edge with any purpose or strength, then we don't really have to slide. So sometimes I think the overtaught part is the flip side of that same discussion about the edge.
I love that. All right, let's transition this to the defensive side now. And I know I gave you a tough question, kind of two-parter, but the defensive part of this, what is overtaught and is a little bit more of like a skill that guys shouldn't be focusing on as much? And then what is that undervalued trait that guys, need to spend more time on?
Yeah, that's a great question, and you had Jesse Bernhardt on a couple of weeks ago. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yes.
Fantastic, by the way, fantastic. So he's working with some really good players at the University of Maryland, and he's a PLL guy and all that. And so every time, again, the pendulum, right? Like, we're talking to your audience here, and they may be coaching PLL, they may be coaching college, high school, middle school. It all depends on where you are on that spectrum. But I think fundamentally, the things that your guests have said about defense, I would 100% agree with. And that is, position is position. Yes, we need great position. And again, I can't do this on screen, but your hips have to be down, your hands have to be up. Position.
What was that positioning concept you were taking me to? Just a lightning question. What was that T concept that you were talking me through on the perimeter defense?
Yeah, it's kind of a, and again, there's so much more to this. I'll give you the lightning answer, but I did it from basketball. I coached girls basketball for 30 years too, which is also so helpful on this, by the way, about how players learn and develop and all that. So one way to talk about it is I call T-butt, which in basketball would be draw a line from the rim to the player that you're defending. So whoever has the ball, wherever that is, just picture that on the arc somewhere. Draw that line, and then you defend with your hips in a T across that line. T-butt, as opposed to opening up way too much, again, pendulum, either way. Like you always hear this, and again, with lacrosse and basketball, he's all right, he's all left, she's all right, she's all left, and people tend to overplay that, turn their hips, and you get a little shade. I call it shade, yeah, and I think we talked about that. But so it's T-butt with a little shade to the stronger side. But if you go too much, you're giving them too much room to operate. Particularly, again, the people that are skilled in the indoor game, they'll find a way to get back to their good hand. So even if you crazy overplay them, they'll still do it. So that's the answer to the T-butt. I call it T-butt. I try to make this as simple as I can. T-butt on the ball, which is a good base. And again, it's not 100%. And as the play in lacrosse moves around the field, things change a little bit. And one thing that's a little bit different in basketball and soccer defense is that your stick, your hand position on your stick matters. Are you a left-handed defender? Or are you a right-handed defender? And that kind of matters too, as per the discussion we just had on the arm tackles, right? So, and I was listening to Jesse talk about that. I think you asked him some questions about, what do you do with the pipe, and do you check, and do you
When to put hands on a
chicken
guy.
wing,
Yep.
hands on guy, all that stuff. So I think that's a little tiny bit more specific to lacrosse than basketball, because in basketball you don't have a stick. And so that's another little subplot that I think matters. So as you move around the field, the T-butt thing changes a little bit, but again, lightning round, that's
Yeah.
what I call it, T-butt.
Okay.
And over the course of a season, you'll play some relatively sound defense if that's your default.
Okay.
Okay, now go back to the question about I lost where I was on
yeah. Overvalued as opposed to undervalued.
yeah. So position. Yes. It has to be great position. I think, and maybe that might be the undervalued part in terms of younger players. Probably check more than they should. Again, I'd love to hear from your guests here. A lot younger players, meaning I love that 6th, 7th, 8th grade window, because if you have good habits in your players coming out of 8th grade, man, that makes it so much more fun when they're 9th and 10th grade on varsity. And if you're fighting some of those things coming out of 8th grade or 9th grade, it's really hard to backtrack that. So position. Let's say that's undertaught. Overtaught, maybe, again, and I think a couple of your guests have said this, when and coaches have asked me this over the last 35 years, including last year in college setting, like, what do you teach? And I'm doing this on purpose with my screen, with your hands, and some of your guests were like, yeah, we teach the guys, whatever, like they expect the guys to be able to reconcile that. And I would say this. I will say. Let me edit a thought. The use of hands on defense, from my perspective, that again, that linebacker basketball defense, hands on people and driving situations with defensive hands, I think is grossly undervalued. Gotta value that more, because again, if you start reaching, sorry to be weird on the screen here, but you lose that base, and now we're into arm tackles, because we're and now your guests have also said, and we said it earlier, there is a place for some aggressive checks. We need aggressive checks. We want to disrupt people, so we have to teach that too, but it's a time and place type of proposition.
Yeah.
And you have to teach it all, and that's where the coaching comes in, I think.
I want to change up gears here for a second. I want to talk about kind of practice philosophy and how you approach this. You're going out to a practice field, you're looking at it for 5 minutes. What is something that, would kind of, if you were watching it, not take you off, but be like, hey, let's update this, or let's kind of change this? What kind of walking out in that 5 minutes would tell you a practice is being well run as opposed to not?
These are really good questions, man. This is this is hard. I'll give you a bad answer to start real quickly. It's hard to say, because every coach and every program, every team has kind of got their own little thing. And, what I think about it, no offense to me, is sort of irrelevant. If some coaches want to, the first 5 minutes is shaking off school, or you got guys in the training room, or, it's hard to say what people value. And I think that's totally okay. If it's me personally, like once we kind of get moving, I like players to move. And I'm going to violate that in a few minutes when you ask another question that I'm hoping you'll ask. But players moving is generally a good thing. Okay. Now, it could be too much. Again, pendulum, if you just mindlessly moving a lot, not really instructing, that's no good. But I like to see teams moving. I like players throwing, catching, and scooping and shooting as much as humanly possible. Again, depending on your coaching staff and your field. I got a great line, and most of my little jingles that I call them now, I've picked up from many other people. Is coach the guys was, how brilliant is that? From a college coach, coach the guys. And again, I'll exaggerate on the pendulum part for a second. The coaches have to kind of warm up a little bit and connect with each other. You've got coaches coming in from out in town sometimes, long day at work. They're late because, whatever, right? And they had a rough day. And what are we working on today, coach? And, you hand them the practice plan. And, so there's that little bit of time where you sort of have to connect with your coaches. But the other part of that is sometimes the coaches will just kind of, and again, I'm exaggerating on purpose, stand off to the side and just kind of like lean in on each other and go like, oh man, Q's not working very hard today. And then Duff's not, and again, coach the guys, don't coach each other. Now you have to interact with your coaches. And sometimes it's good at certain points in the practice to go over to your coach and go like, hey, let's change this or let's do this. But I would recommend try to keep that as an absolute minimum and have that discussion ahead of time or afterwards. But again, this is just me. Coach the guys. That means get out and interact with the guys instead of interacting with coaches. Now, again, I'd be very happy for people to disagree with that. But if you have to pick the pendulum on that, coach the guys. That means while they're playing, while they're doing stuff, don't shimmy in on your coach over there and complain about something. Get over that guy and go, hey, man, we need you to move a little bit more on this play. That's better coaching than the other part, I would say. But it's a personality thing. And I would say, too, it's exhausting. The way that, some of these things that I'm saying, some of them are exhausting. Like, you got to keep moving and tracking it. So, again, that's a separate little nugget over there. But usually I can tell, if you were to walk onto a field, again, first 5 minutes is kind of funky, but that 45-minute window, players should be moving and coaches should be coaching.
Yeah.
And if you get a water break and you go over to your head coach and go like, hey, I think next set we got a blah, 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 then that's when we do it. But when it's coaching time, coach them.
It's a good distinction because you do have that like coaches social hour that can take place, right? Where you got like 3 or 4 coaches kind of talking about the weekend or something, but that needs to have its own time and place. Coach, I want to mention, first of all, that you can ask or bring up this question that you want me to ask you if I don't ask it, but I do love the sound bites that you have here on the kind of pre-episode stuff that you sent me. You Get You is a really great one. Keep coaches coaching. Let's dive into some of these sound bites and kind of how you would use them in a practice environment or just being able to teach and coach your whole team.
Yeah, thanks again, Zach. These are great questions. You Get You, I wish I could remember the woman's name, but we had a training opportunity a number of years ago where a woman came from William Smith College up by Hobart in Geneva, New York, and that was one of her little jingles, You Get You. And it's something that, as a coach, your listeners know if they're coaching, you get you. And her point was, if you're tired or you're frustrated or you're late or you got a bad attitude as a coach, and again, I'm exaggerating. Most of your coaches that are listening to this are high quality and they're working really hard and doing what's right for the kids. But if you're having a bad day as a coach or you're tired, the chances are that your players are going to be having a bad day and getting tired. I think one of the ones I sent you, Gino Ariema, who most of your guests know, women's basketball, UConn, however many national championships, at least 10 probably, called it, if you want to fix your team, fix yourself. So a lot of these things your coaches know, but I love when people give you these little nuggets. You get you. If you're happy and you're positive and you're coaching those kids, they will respond with happy and positive and receiving coaching. If you, and again, exaggerating here, hey, Q, you just threw the ball away for the 50th time in a row. And, that's just tell, hey, don't throw the ball away. Or even better, I've heard this one too. Don't tell the kids what they're doing wrong. Tell them what you want. So if somebody just threw the ball away 50 times in a row, you don't have to, they already know that. You go, hey, let's get it there next time. That's what I want. And so these little jingles, and I'll credit Janine Tucker, who was the women's coach at Johns Hopkins for many, many years. Her son is the head coach at Norfolk Academy now. You guys probably know him, Ryan Tucker. And her thing is coaching sound bites, not paragraphs, which is what we just said. And again, I always exaggerate with my coaches, my young coaches, and tell them, hey, here's the long version of this, and here's how you can shorten that up, soundbite.
Well,
because it's exhausting.
I think you just went over it we started the episode talking about this, which was, let's talk wall ball, but you kind of displayed why being goofy footed is something that you want to be, but you also have the soundbite bad feet. Hey, let's go to bad feet. Let's go to bad pass. Things like that. Those are the sound bites. I love it.
And what other ones did you have there?
I would love to hear your favorite ones, but before that, I do want to get ending with this "you get you" piece. I see energy, patience, effort, respect, enthusiasm. These are just 5 that are kind of there with "you get you." What is the toughest one of those? Of energy, being patient, showing effort, respect, enthusiasm, all that stuff. What is the hardest one for coaches to model sometimes that you see, especially kind of younger coaches that are getting into the business of teaching and being a teacher? What's the hardest one for younger coaches that you see coming up to really get?
Probably, I don't know, patience is, you can probably say that to anybody. Patience is probably a good one. Energy is a good one. And I said you might get to this later. One of the notes I sent you on that, I think, was I call it coach ahead, over, or behind. So this is a recommendation to your coaches, and it's related. Coach ahead, coach over, coach behind. So again, as you're watching your players trying to do what we want them to do, and again, if you're off to the side and you're tired or you're frustrated because your players aren't executing like you want them to, you kind of have to push through that and get it as positive as you can. But coach ahead is in, or lane, right, for your defenders, like get in the hole or get in your passing lane. So that's ahead. So as you watch your players going through whatever they're doing and they need to get in, I usually tell my players in. And Jesse said something about that, I think, on your other episode, like about how to just constantly working to get them where they need to be. Mm-hmm. So that's a little bit on the ahead part. What was the next one? Over. Over is, and that in is, could be directed towards a player or maybe a couple, like in a defensive kind of thing. The coaching over is usually a little more macro, like a half field kind of thing. If we're not getting the ball to the backside of the offense, let's say, now we have to project that over. Again, energy and enthusiasm, positive, like, hey guys, let's get the ball to the backside. Okay, that's over. So all 20 or 30 of your players can hear that. This is real time. And if you have to blow the whistle to stop something, I say go ahead. But again, if I were to walk on a field or, somebody watching my teams, if you see the coaches stopping the play every 6 minutes and doing a 6-minute lecture, I think that's too much. Mm. So find a way to coach over what your players are doing where you don't have to stop everything. Coaching behind it is exhausting, by the way. Like, this is really hard to do, and you got to pay attention. And coaching behind is a little bit harder, but now the ball swings around or goes to the other end of the field. Let's say if you're in a full field, ball goes to the other end of the field, and the guy who should have taken a shot on this end, didn't or did or whatever. And as the ball's going away from you as a coach, and now that player's kind of out of the play for a second, you're like, hey, Zach, I wouldn't have taken that shot, or kick it down the side as I'm watching the ball go the other way. So we got a lot going on here where you're coaching kids to get in or get their passing lane or get their hands on or shoot or don't shoot, to the macros. Hey, let's move the ball earlier, to trailing behind, which sometimes gets literally left behind. because you got so much you're tracking. But I love those little follow-ups, and most of those are like a whisper. Like you shoulder in on that guy and like, hey man, I wouldn't take that shot next time, and keep going. Or even shorten that up. So again, sound bites, but very actively engaged with your players. And again, you get you. If you're upbeat like that and you're coaching kids, most of these players want to be good, and teach them how to receive that. Because some players will be like, hey man, did you just hear what I just said? And they're like, oh no, I missed that. I'm like, all right, well, we got to listen.
Yeah.
And over time, they'll hear me talking to you and knowing that they're now responsible for hearing that. And we keep going. So it's a very interactive, very difficult, but the rewards I think are infinite in terms of how much I've enjoyed it. And, hopefully, the outcome is how the guys or girls are playing, again, in overtimes in championship games. If they're playing really well in overtimes and they're not fumbling balls and breaking down and yelling at refs and all those things, you've got to coach it to that level. And it's very hard to simulate that on a day-to-day basis, but you can keep driving it that way. So you want good play as the result of all this, and the sportsmanship and teammateness, we call it, and leadership. All those things are baked in, but fundamentally, you want your team, your players, to play really, really hard, to play well, to react to adversity, to be able to win games in overtime against really good teams. And it takes a lot of work, and you got to be kind of lucky. That's a whole separate thing, but and it's a coaching thing all the way through.
One thing that I've tried to be more cognizant of when I'm coaching is kind of just the energy and what I'm giving off on a game day as opposed to a practice. And I really like the analogy some coach was using of talking about being a corner man on game day, right? When you're practicing, pushing really hard, and I'm not the easiest coach to play for, and I get that. So I'm trying to kind of work myself through being more positive, not maybe getting critical on some players while they're playing. I see some guys can deal with it and they'll just flow. And then some guys, they almost like turn their attention towards you while they're playing, which is not what I want at all. I don't want them thinking about me while they're playing, even though I have this natural tendency to do what you're talking about, which is kind of coach them through the game and try to help them. So yeah, those are just things I've been thinking about more and more is, I'm a tough coach, but on game day, how do I scale that back to a more kind of cornerman in boxing where I'm there to pump you up as opposed to, just being really critical. Yeah, these are just my kind of unfiltered thoughts hearing you talk, Coach.
Yeah, no, I think that's right on the money. And the games are definitely different. Again, if you're thinking overtimes and championship games, it's not a good time to be telling your players that they're not working hard enough and they threw 5 balls out of bounds. So yeah, you have to react to that. That's where your jingles come in, and that's where your teaching comes in. Like, just fight harder instead of, again, a big long, hey, number 12's, the last 5 times down, he shot it off his wrong, just dig into as concise and positive, good energy as you can provide. I totally agree. And sometimes and I hate to say this, but if you're in a game that's already been decided, and I talk to my colleagues a lot about this because my high school and college career, very few of the games that I played in football and lacrosse were, runaways either way, like not many, like almost zero. So every game that I played in was, 1 touchdown in football or 1 or 2 or 3 goals in lacrosse. Again, a handful outside that. But if you're in a game where your team is up 10 in the third quarter, and the guys, and again, I'm exaggerating for your listeners, the guys are goofing off a little bit and they're like, oh, well, we already won this thing, and they're, getting bad habits. That's when you dig in on that part. Like, hey, you guys, or take them out and like, hey, pull them off for a second, go, hey, we're still playing here, and get them back in, or again, get that sound bite. Stay focused on what we're doing. So again, the sound bites and the overall coaching drive that hopefully throughout the season.
Coach, give me some, maybe three more, let's say. Let's top three sound bites or top three jingles that you use. I really like this concept of and being able to go back right after the recording, and I'll write all these down and use them during the season. But
Yeah.
what are some other jingles that you use on offense and defense, or just for your team in general?
Oh my gosh, my players would die right now. I get text messages from my former players sometimes, and literally all it'll say one of those little jingles. Like it's not like, "Hey coach, how you doing? How's your wife?" Like it's just 0-0. That's a good one, right? We play, practice, like the score is 0-0 all the time. Again, that's that overtime thing, 0-0. Okay. We have one we call USA, which means we're playing Team USA, which means, and again, exaggerating a hair here, which is like, oh well, we're only playing so and so team that we've beaten the last 5 years by 20 goals each year, so we don't really have to work that hard. And so our little gimmick on that was like, no, you're playing Team USA, and I could do this with the jersey. I'm like, it's going to say their team name here, but it's a fake. It's really Team USA. So again, I'll get a text message from somebody from 10 years ago, just say USA. The default one is grounders, which I'll make this as quick as I can. Piling them all together is, how do you win a game? Well, you need the ball, right? So, my coaches, Richie Mead, certainly among them, Don Holmes, my high school coach, and lots of others, ground balls win games. You hear it all the time. So Coach Mead calls them grounders. And so we practice grounders a lot. And so we started talking about like, hey, you got to get grounders. And my teams were pretty good at grounders. And we got to play great defense. I know you love that, right? Like, okay, get a stop and get the ground ball. Good. That means we're going to be able to compete. Well, guess what? We're throwing balls away, clearing, or we're not finishing shots. So now it's like, wait a minute. Like we also have to score, and we have to win faceoffs, and we have to make saves. And so we started kind of piling the next save. So now when we're playing defense, we need to make the next save. We need the next stop, basketball. If we are in overtime in a championship game and we have the ball, we need to score, which means we have to take a good shot, which means, so it turned into, we called it next grounder for a while, which is the only thing that matters. Again, 0-0, all that other stuff. Only thing that matters is the next grounder, because if you're down 3 or up 3, it doesn't really matter, right? You got to get the ball. And then we started adding those other pieces. Let's win this faceoff. Let's make this save. And then everything sort of turned into a grounder on the field, but I'll have your listeners kind of chuckle at me a little bit. Then it started turning into being a good teammate's a grounder, and getting to class on time is a grounder, and doing your homework is a grounder, and literally everything is a grounder, which now it's kind of morphed into what I would call like outwork the next 3 seconds right in front of you. Win a faceoff, make a save, get a D-stop, scrape through that edge that we talked about, handle the ball on the wall, be a good teammate, be a good young man or woman. Everything's a grounder. And so those text messages I was talking about, it'll just say grounders.
That's the top jingle that we'll take away from this episode. I appreciate that breakdown as well, Coach. I like the idea of breaking those things into things that are tough but need to get done, and that's exactly what a grounder is. You need the ball to win the game. I have a quote here, and we're not done with the episode, but and if you have any more sound bites, please bring them into the conversation. But I have a quote here. Outside of my parents, I cannot think of another adult that has had a more meaningful impact on my life than Coach Duffy, and that's from T.W. Johnson. And you mentioned your coach, Richie Mead, and I'm just interested. You've been a mentor and a coach to so many people. I'm interested in your mentors and what you've learned from someone like Coach Mead or some other mentors you might have had along the way in your vast experience here in lacrosse.
Wow, that's a great question, and thanks for the invitation to say that. Yeah, again, this would be its own separate podcast, but I would say, wow, my high school coaches, unreal. And again, your listeners, I hope they'll believe this. I got a text message yesterday, kind of uninvited, from my JV football coach from high school, to a group of us. So my high school coaches, football coaches too. My head coach was a guy named Bob Reefschneider, who was an All-American at Navy, College Football Hall of Fame, and we're still in good contact with him. He's doing well up in Delaware. Steve Mollett, Mike Hanna, Don Holmes. I hate to even mention the names because there's so many. And my teammates have been my mentors and guides and support all these years. My college coaches, teammates, Brian Matthews, Dick Slaza, Jerry Schmidt, hate to miss one, Kerry Oshanik, Joe Duty, Jack Jones, Scott Allison was the AD at Roanoke College for many years, and of course Richie Meade. Navy lacrosse camp I did for many, many years with a bunch of really great Navy coaches, but also coaches from all over the country, including what we called back then my amigo colleague. So I'll spare you the story. Unbelievable support that I didn't really deserve, but my coaches at Navy, off the charts great. My teammates, off the charts, still in great contact with a number of them today, and so supportive. The players that I've gotten to work with all these years is the reason we do it. And again, couldn't possibly be better. The coach you just mentioned, T.W. Johnson, over at NSA, was one of my players at NSA way back, and was a national coach of the year at Limestone College, and now is back at NSA, and I'm in pretty frequent contact with him, watching, so proud of him, and Trent Bly from NSA, and all the great players I've had there, and the girls I've coached, and some legendary coaches that I've worked with in girls basketball and boys lacrosse, Betty Jean Riddick, Larry Riggs, Joanne Wren, Eric Acker. We can go on and on forever there. I apologize if I missed anybody. Just great coaches, so supportive, and it continues on to this day. Like I said, I get text messages all the time, and to have your football coaches from, I won't tell you how many years ago, but have your football coaches from high school still being a part of your life at this stage is absolutely off the charts. And I'll mention quickly, since I have a second, my wife Jen, who played soccer was a soccer star at our high school in New York, and then at William and Mary. And so since we're about an hour away, we've been able to stay in really good contact with that school and the program. And she's been all in with me and my colleagues and my players and their families all these years, and it's just been great. So when you asked of who supported me or mentored me, it's all those good people, and probably a bunch that I didn't mention specifically, but so grateful to all of them, but especially the players and the students that I've worked with all these years. Really, really an honor, and so much fun, and a lot of work, but loved every second of it, and so grateful for them and their families, and like I said, I'm in contact still with quite a few of them, and it means the world to me and to Jen and our two children as well. So thanks for asking that question.
Of course, Coach. And I know you said you were semi-retired, but I saw you on the sideline at fall ball of multiple different teams. So I don't think your journey is done here in the lacrosse realm of things. But in your time, you've coached hundreds of players, touched a lot of different lives. I'm just interested in how you'd want to be thought of from a legacy perspective, or just how you want those players and coaches to have thought about what you did for them and just your legacy there.
Yeah, wow. Well, that's a really tough one to answer, I think. But thanks for letting me try. And I think most of it's just been an attempt to pass along all the goodness that has come my way from those same people I just mentioned, and try to be a good example and try to be as positive as I can. And I'm sure was not 100% on that as much as I probably needed to be at various points. But I hope I try to set a good example and support our players and students and as best as I could, and really just to pass things along and what they're hearing from me is, as we've said now several times, is a function of a lot of other people who have directly impacted me or whose teachings and books and articles and webcasts and all those things have given me some good things to think about. So
I'll kind of meld these two questions together, and it'll be my last couple questions here. You mentioned some books there. Are there any favorite books and why that have kind of developed you as a coach that could be beneficial to those people that are listening, trying to kind of get their career developed? And
oh
things
man,
like this?
yeah. And again, I'm going to get in a lot of trouble here because I know I'll miss a few. But Bob Scott, the longtime coach at Johns Hopkins, wrote a great book, Lacrosse Technique and Tradition. Dr. Tom Venom wrote Native American Lacrosse, Little Brother of War, very helpful. A couple other books, John Wooden books. Janine Tucker's written some good books. Admiral James Stavridis has written a couple good ones. Bill Belichick just put one out called The Art of Winning, which I read. I'm in trouble, man. You can't. There's 50 that I should look at my bookshelf here, but too many to mention. But
Sure.
I do like to read, and I'm trying to read as many as I can. And John Gordon's books have all been good, and Admiral McRaven has some great books out. If this gets to any of those good people, I'm going to be in trouble. But tons and tons of books. I love to read, and I have to stop there for now.
Yeah, you can't name every book out there, so I appreciate you bringing in some of those insights to those of you that are listening. Hopefully, you can check out some of those books. Last question I have here, Coach: favorite drill and why? And I don't think a drill can get upset that you didn't mention it, so I think we're good.
Yeah, good. Okay.
What's your favorite drill and why?
Yeah, this was. I think I hinted at this earlier. And again, tons of really good drills. I think, again, just with the default of I like when people are moving. That's kind of my personal bias. So anything involving numbers, I think, is good. So 4v3s, 5v4, 5v3.5, drills where you send defenders out and mess up the numbers a little bit. I do like all those things. Ryan Tucker at Norfolk Academy has a little one that I'll mention quickly. He calls it Joey Ball, which is you take your pouch, right, your coaching sweatshirt, and you have a little pouch on that thing, kind of like a kangaroo pouch, and you put 5 or 6 or 10 lacrosse balls in your pouch, and you pretty much put the players in a kind of conventional 10v10 set, although it could be anything, and just move around the field as a coach and put balls into play, and wherever they happen to be, and you'll roll the ball, and sometimes you'll grab a player and hold him and give the ball to the guy closest to him to go to the other end, so you get a little mini fast break. You'll throw the ball, give a guy an advantage. There's a lot of things you can do there. If things speed up or slow down and you don't like where the play has gone after 10 or 20 seconds, you just blow the whistle, throw another ball in, and keep it rolling. I think the guys like doing stuff like that. It's pretty interactive. Can't really do it the whole practice, but again, depending on the rhythm of your practices, some people like to do things for 10, 15, 18, 20 minutes. Usually 20 would be the high end for me on most stuff, but a 12 to 15 minute, end to end. And again, the coach gets to kind of set the pace on that. Joey Ball.
Yeah, I love that. Creating chaos a little bit. We talked about Pendulum for a majority of the episode and creating different scenarios. That's a great one, Coach. Coach Duffy, this has been an honor to have you on. we can absolutely do this again whenever you'd like. I'm definitely down to have a whole nother episode. I think we can honestly have a freaking series with the amount of experience that you have in this game. So again, tremendous honor to have you on. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, and just tell your listeners if I can follow up on any of this, happy to take a phone call or stop by a school or whatever people want. I've got a little more time than I used to, so it's really been great. So thanks for having me. What an honor, and keep up the good work with your series. And I know you've had some really great guests, and I'm just happy to be one of them now.